Welcome to another Creative Mornings, again live from my living room, obviously in a different format to our in-person events, which I'm sure we're all missing. I know I am. So the theme this month is Insecure. It was picked by our Louisville chapter, and the illustration is by Rachel Sinclair. Now, Creative Mornings as a global event couldn't run without the generosity of our three main sponsors. And the first one is MailChimp. We use them for all of our newsletters, as do a lot of other companies. Obviously, send out millions and millions of newsletters daily using MailChimp. And they have launched a new bi-monthly magazine called Career that delivers real stories and insights to help you work better, live smarter, and be happier. So if you'd like to sign up to that, just follow the link that's shown there on the screen. And they'll be able to email that to you on a bi-monthly basis. WordPress is another of our main sponsors, and they, as I'm sure you know, WordPress are behind something ridiculous like 2/3 of the amount of websites that are on the internet. And they have partnered with us, with the Creative Mornings again, to relaunch Own Your Content, where Creative Mornings will be revisiting favourite insights to learn how we can own our own content, and this will be complemented with webinars and resources. Can you tell I'm reading this from my notes because I don't trust my own memory at the moment. And Basecamp is a new global sponsor for us this year, and they are launching a new email service called Hey. And when I mean email service, I mean, you know, like Google Mail or Outlook. They've actually taken that kind of platform and they've completely rethought it, and they're modernizing it. And I think they're wanting to test it now. So if you'd like to try it, then email them at iwant@hey.com and they'll send you an invitation. So Creative Mornings is a global event with over 215 chapters going on around the world. There's at least 20,000 attendees coming every month, but I imagine that's more than that now, with people being able to tune in online and people being able to up their numbers like we have been able to. Creative Mornings also has launched field trips, which is an opportunity for you to try out different workshops on a huge range of different areas and topics. So you could try out yoga, you could learn a language, there's different craft activities, and they're all virtual events and they're free. As far as I'm pretty sure they're all free. But if you check that out and you can try some new things. So as well as our global sponsors, locally, as a chapter in Sheffield, we wouldn't be able to run either without our supporters. And Sheffield, the Art and Design Department at Sheffield Hallam University have been our main sponsor, I think pretty sure since the very beginning, or very close to the beginning, and we wouldn't be able to exist without their continued support. And we're very much looking forward to being able to get back there, to have an event there when all this is over, especially in the post office hall. It's a lovely venue. The Site Gallery have also joined to support us this year. They obviously have been affected by COVID as well and had to close their doors, but they moved a number of activities online, which you can find out more on their website or their social medias if you want to give them a follow. I know there were Q&As and I think some workshops. Just check it out, see what they're offering, see what's going on, and find out the latest information about their exhibitions that they might have coming when they open again. Sorry, baby brain's kicking in and I can't get the words out. So just to introduce the team, that's me, Leanne, when my hair was a bit better and it wasn't just one massive split end. And that's Molly on the right. And Molly is our team copywriter. And as I mentioned earlier, she's helping me today with running the chat, keeping an eye on that. Joe is our team photographer. And that's the lovely Bert as well, featuring there. I think Joe is watching. So hi, Joe, if you are. Matt is usually our resident videographer, but obviously with us being on Zoom, he is taking a backseat really at the moment until this passes. Rich is we call him our team hero, because if we need a backup photographer, illustrator, words of advice, shoulder to cry on, Rich is the person that we go to. Lucy, all our regulars know, is our team greeter. She is the smiley face that you see when you come to our in-person events. And I think Lucy is watching as well. So hi, Lucy. And Jack is our team illustrator. He's a very talented illustrator, and he has been working recently for us on creating a series of illustrations of the speakers to create a collection. So each month he just picks an image from the event and illustrates it, obviously. So if you'd like to check them out, just follow our Instagram page and you'll be able to see them there, and give Jack a follow as well. So the hashtags this month are the usual: CMSHEFFIELD and CMINSECURE. And so without further ado, I will introduce Lauren Kelly, aka Behaviour Studio. So I first met Lauren at Birmingham Design Festival last year. She's a design psychologist and founder of Manchester's Behaviour Studio, and her work covers design and behavioural science, which is the psychology behind what you do and why. And Behaviour Studio have worked with Microsoft, the British government, Hyper Island, and more. So very impressive. So it's over to you, Lauren.
Great, thank you for that intro, Leanne. I'm just going to quickly share this. Can you see my screen? Not yet. Are we good? Okay. So yes, today we are going to take a deep dive into imposter syndrome. So I hope by the end of the next 20-25 minutes, not only will you feel less alone in the way that you're feeling, but you should have some form of structure to start thinking about how to kind of overcome the limitations of imposter syndrome. So this is what I thought. What if I'm found out? One of the main thoughts I had as I walked into my first university seminar. Everyone here is so clever. I'm not good enough. How did I get here? Why am I here? It appears I started a new chapter in my life, and at the same time, I got this new feeling that I'd never really felt before. And it was a feeling that has followed me for the rest of my life in kind of like different degrees. It followed me to when I applied for my first job. It followed me for when I was pitching my new first clients. And in my first job, I was terrified. Like, I don't have a traditional degree in design. And yet I was around a table with designers designing. And I was always at this fear that I was going to be found out as a fraud, as someone that just got there from luck by accident. And every time that my creative director would pull me to one side, I always thought, this is it. This is the moment he's going to ask me to leave and to go home. And instead it would be for some encouragement or some form of compliment. And at every time I'd be like, oh no, it's okay, like it was just easy because it was an easy brief, or I was just lucky because I managed to find a really good photographer to work with. I always externalize those kind of like accomplishments or moments of success to someone else. And the thing is, I studied psychology. I studied psychology at university. I know what this feeling is. And this feeling is this thing called imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome, there's one thing basically reading it in a book and being told it by your professors. And there's another thing being able to identify that this is what you're suffering with yourself. And imposter syndrome is essentially defined as this. People doubt their accomplishments and have a persistent and often internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. They view their success as luck or good timing, and often dismiss it as people misinterpreting or misbelieving their sense of accomplishments or successes in the past. It limits us, and it has pretty destructive kind of impacts on us. The coping mechanisms we use to basically try and avoid this fear of failure, this crippling fear that we shouldn't belong, include things like procrastination. We fly under the radar. We don't put ourselves forward for jobs or promotions. We just try to like not be seen. And driven by the feeling of basically not belonging and our own ineptitude, we tend to work significantly harder and over prepare and overwork. So you burn out. If you've ever worked until midnight, repeatedly going over the same presentation or the same project with fear when you present it to a client, you're probably hitting imposter syndrome, when in actual fact, it was good enough and you were good enough. And the result is these coping mechanisms cost us. They cost us in terms of our mental health, but also our success. If we're self-limiting left, right, and center, how can we build the career that we intended when we set out into the traditional working world? And how can we ever achieve or be the people when we get into management that can see it in others and encourage other people coming up? But this is the thing, because I studied it, I know the science behind imposter syndrome, and I know that we're not alone. And like I would have felt embarrassed or scared to admit this, but I'm not, because I know at least 70% of people experience imposter syndrome. And you know what? I actually think it's much higher. If you look at kind of like the state of the coping mechanisms that I just mentioned to you, we've probably all experienced them at some point. And imposter syndrome is one of the biggest afflictions, I think, of anyone working in particularly the creative sector, because the creative sector is full of critique and assessment and pushing the boundaries of our own comfort level. So it's the perfect kind of situation to start thinking about our own fraud or imposter nature. And this is the thing, we're not alone. If 70% of people feel this, all the people at the top of their game feel this. Maya Angelou, one of the leading poets and authors, basically said this in an interview: I've written 11 books, and each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find out. I've run a game on everyone, and they're going to find me out. And she's not alone. Even Einstein basically said this: I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler. If people at the top of their game, the people that have made it, feel imposter syndrome, it makes me think of this kind of like encouragement that we're always told. We're told to fake it until we make it. But then once we make it, is the inverse also true? If we make it, are we then a fake? And is there a better way to start thinking about this and thinking about imposter syndrome in a way that can actually help us instead of hinder us? As Leanne mentioned, I basically work in a space called behavioural design, where I use behavioural science to really understand people and to create positive behaviour change. So I wondered, actually, is imposter syndrome something that we can change using the tools of behavioural design? Is there something that we can, at the end of today's talk, walk away with, just one small little tool that can actually start changing the way that we're thinking about ourselves and our sense of being a fraud or an imposter when we're working or when we're putting ourselves forward for work? So that's what I set out to do. And I started to think about this. Well, what is the difference between an imposter and a belonger? And the first thing I want to basically say to you is, it's not that they are more capable or intelligent than you. And that's a really important thing, because imposter syndrome makes you feel like you have less ability and you are less intelligent than the people around you. But the reality is you're at the same table. You're making the same bread. You should be there and you do belong. So if it's not that they're more capable or intelligent than you, what is it? What is the difference between someone that is an imposter and someone that is a belonger? I think it comes down to this, they think differently, particularly in the way that they process thoughts or process their emotions about a situation. So instead of thinking like an imposter, can we start to retrain ourselves and retrain the way we're thinking so we can think like a belonger and limit those negative effects or those negative coping mechanisms that's basically plaguing our mental health and our success at work? Your negative thoughts are the driving force that turns imposter syndrome from that cloud of doubt that occasionally can just follow you around like a bit of rain on an otherwise sunny day, and turns it into a dark shadow that damages you, attaches to you, and you can never let go of. So what do we do about these negative thoughts? And how can we stop them? How can we stop them in their track and actually turn them, instead of into negative thoughts, into a positive thought, so that it never becomes a limiting factor and it never destroys what you're trying to achieve? So I think actually what we need to do is start creating these things called belong statements. This isn't something that exists in the psychology world. This is something that I've come to the solution as in terms of a behavioral world. But I've used these a couple of times and actually they've really started to help. And a belong statement is essentially taking the situation and redefining it so that it's not a negative outcome in terms of the negative things we feel about being an imposter, to the positive outcomes, the things that we feel about being a belonger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically read 3 questions to you. And these 3 questions are to start rewiring those negative thought patterns that we have about feeling like an imposter whilst at work, whilst at home, whilst in our personal lives. And these questions and the answers are just for you. We're not going to expect you to share them today. These are to go in your little book of thoughts or your little notebooks. And hopefully at the end of it, you'll have a set of belong statements. So the first question is, I am great at. When we have imposter syndrome, we all frequently squash our successes and squash our accomplishments. And self-affirmation, or the feeling of acknowledging the things that we're good at, is the first step to starting to undo the damage of feeling like an imposter and thinking like an imposter. So I want you to take 3 minutes and write 3 things that you are great at and dig into them. What are those 3 things? Are they a previous success? Are there something that's your hidden superpower? What worked well for you in the past? And just write them down on your notebook. Okay, last 30 seconds. Okay. The next step is to start to identify when are we starting to feel imposter syndrome, or in the sense of behavioral design, when are we starting to be triggered? What is the thing that is happening before and at the time of feeling imposter syndrome? The more that we can basically identify when and if it is happening, the more likely it is that we are intervene the thought, the negative thought, as it's starting to form and do something about it. So I want you to start thinking about this question. I feel imposter syndrome when? And just note down 2, 3, however kind of like points or triggers that you have noticed. So for me, I feel imposter syndrome when I'm going into a meeting with senior people. So start thinking about it. I'm going to put another 3 minutes on the clock. So I feel imposter syndrome when? Okay, last 30 seconds. Okay, that's time. And then the last question of today is it makes me feel. So what we're doing is we're transitioning from the external trigger, something that's happened outside of ourselves, to something that's then happening within ourselves. So what is the first thing we're feeling about? So take one of the external triggers that you've just written down and start thinking about, how does this actually make me feel? So for me, walking into a new meeting can sometimes make me feel scared. And what we're trying to do is identify our emotional reaction to what is happening so that when it does happen again, we can be like, oh, I know what's happening right now. Now I know when to intervene. So I'm going to put another 3 minutes on the clock and look over one of your external triggers and think, how does that make me feel? Okay, last 30 seconds. Okay. So now what I'd like you to do is to just go back over your sheet and start looking at your answers, and start kind of looking at how the things that you've written down are so easy to form this imposter or fraud mindset. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take some of those answers that you've put down, some of those ideas you've jotted down, and we're going to turn it into a belong statement. So we're going to start turning the negative things that you've just written down and acknowledging them and kind of like inverting them and putting them on the head. So we're going to basically take one from each of the sections and write it into a belong statement. So this is a belong statement. The next time the event happens, so answer from B, and I feel C, I will say to myself, I belong because A. So for me, the next time I walk into a meeting and I feel scared, I will say to myself, I belong because I'm great at taking two disparate ideas and putting them together. Okay, last 30 seconds. Okay. So what we're starting to do is to turn our imposter thoughts into belonger thoughts, in acknowledging when we're starting to recognize the external trigger, and then how it's kind of like translating inside of us, how we process what's happening in terms of our internal thought mechanism, and then almost hot wiring it. So instead of thinking something negative and something kind of like externalizing our successes or feeling really bad about ourselves, we're starting to hijack that and put something really positive in there. Now, changing your thoughts is hard, right? It's really fundamental in terms of who we are and how we think. We all know this whenever we try and do some big changes at the start of the year. But you've already started. These belong statements, they basically will not now start acting as your weapons, the weapons against the next time you start to feel like you don't belong and you are a fraud. Because in actual fact, you do belong. You're at the same table for a reason. And it's time that you start implementing the way that a belonger thinks instead of the way an imposter thinks. Thank you. That's me. So we're at the end of the talk. I realize I actually haven't put any socials on here. So if you'd like to contact me, email me at lauren@behaviour.studio, or just ping us on social. We're everywhere on social at We Are Behaviour. Or if you want my direct, because my DMs are also open, you can get me on Twitter here. I'm quite a friendly person, so just feel to like drop the way you're thinking and feeling, and I can probably help you. Great, thanks.
Thanks, Lauren. If you want to quit out of your shared screen.
I know, I'm doing it. Hang on. So many clickies. Stop share. There we go.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was really good. Kind of as someone who suffers from imposter syndrome and a lack of confidence pretty much all day, every day. It was great to kind of just be able to think about it a bit more and, you know, try and get to the root of it. I think I probably need to do a bit more work on my belonger thoughts, you know, and try and retrain my mind a bit more. But I hope everyone else found it really helpful as well, and, you know, get something out of it. As I mentioned, Molly's going to do the Q&A. So if anyone's got any questions, if they want to fire them into the chat now, and then Molly will can ask them to Lauren. Don't need to be you don't need to hold back and be nervous because you're just typing them. You don't have to speak in front of people, as sometimes happens when we're in person.
Just waiting for them to come through. I think everyone's still thinking about their belong statements.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm like, go deep. Now come back up, like really quick. It's a massive shift. Maybe everyone should just take a moment and take a sip of coffee and kind of like bring themselves back to the like creative morning session. Because we went to some deep places just then.
Sarah's asked if you've got any book recommendations about imposter syndrome if people sort of
you know, I think that would have been really good to have prepared. However, Kate in the messages had put, this really reminds me of Martin Selgium, I can't say his name, and Learned Optimism. So I suggest probably search that out online. Yeah, no, you see, I didn't really come at it from that kind of point of view. I came at it from, if this was a design problem, how would I solve it? And then how would I use it myself? So yeah, I'll look up some books because that probably would have been a good thing to have done.
Well, before I forget, I'd also recommend that if you can, I shared it, I think, a couple of weeks ago, but give Lauren's podcast episode on the Arrest All Mimics podcast a listen, because she's got more advice on there. And I remember when I was talking to you, Lauren, last year at Birmingham Design Festival, you were really helpful for me. You're very good at suggesting things that you think, oh yeah, I should have thought of that myself. But you know, when someone else says it, it seems obvious.
This is the thing, right? Psychology and behavioral science, we assume that we know it because we live it every day, right? We're humans, and it's just a part of us. In actual fact, we're really bad. We're really bad at kind of understanding the why we've done things and why we haven't done things. And that's why I have a job, right? Like I come in and I'm that fresh perspective. So if you ever have the misfortune or opportunity in Leanne's case to get me drunk whilst I'm at an event, I will literally unpack everything you're doing and repack you. Yeah, I kind of love to do it. And it's actually, yeah, sometimes people have like white knuckle beer moment as I'm like, cool, I'm just gonna go now. I've completely unraveled your entire psychology. But yeah, I mean, but there are some successes that come out of it, particularly around, I remember Leanne saying about, you're saying how you were struggling to kind of like manage all of your different side projects and all the ideas that you're in the head, and how your head's really full of all the ideas. And I know if you separate planning and action, you can actually make that really simple. Just do all your planning in one block, choose one thing, and then carry on. And it just takes someone that understands planning psychology, like goal psychology, to just go, hey, why don't you just do this one thing? And you're like, that makes so much sense. And it's like, that's just psychology. You live it, you don't know it.
Yeah,
Go on, Liam.
I was just quickly saying, you know, it was a really good way of simplifying things, because I think I was just getting quite overwhelmed with different options. Oh, I could do it this way, or this way, or this way, and then you end up not doing anything at all because you can't make a decision.
Denise has asked how do you make the distinction between something you like doing and actually being great at it. She says she finds it hard knowing if she's good at something because she doesn't receive any feedback on her work.
Yeah, you know, Denise, I think we're all there. Most of us that work for ourselves or freelance or work in small teams where you're like the only creative person, we're kind of in this like echo chamber of nothingness, right? And you're just kind of like shouting, ah, and there's no echo back. So how do you check? How do you know? The best advice is talk to other people within your sector, people that know that you're kind of like going through the same thing. Mentors are particularly good for this. And a mentor doesn't have to be an official thing. It can just be the person you sit next to in the pub being like, what do you think of my thing? And they can be like, yeah, that's great. And you're like, sweet. And what you're trying to do is kind of like match that I'm really enjoying this with I'm really good at this. And you can only really get that I'm really good at this by having someone else outside kind of be like, hey, you know, that's really good, by the way. And it's reinforcement, it's positive reinforcement. Cool, that thing I am feeling is right because that other person has also said it. Now, there will be times when you think you're actually really bad at something. And it's only like, I have this all the time with clients where you think you're just like, oh God, I just scraped through that, my God. And they're like, this is the best thing ever. And you're like, oh, wow, okay, I need to like restructure how I'm thinking about this thing, this skill I didn't think I had, that actually I'm being told I had, and go back in and unpick it and reassess it. Is that true? Why is that? And what was good about that? So it's in part about being able to have a fresh mind and look at what you're doing, which is really difficult, and having time to really think about it, and then kind of including other people to kind of reinforce or to tweak what you're saying. But yeah, working on your own is really difficult, particularly in our industry, because we constantly need critique and checking.
Thank you. And then one from Emma. She's asked, can you talk a bit about a project involving behavioural science and design that you particularly enjoyed? Any sort of highlight?
Yes. So the majority of my work is basically being parachuted into teams. So it's kind of part training and coaching and working on projects. So stuff I've worked on, the Estonian government was particularly wonderful. Namely because I worked in the innovation department, so I worked across lots of different departments. So one project was with the health department, looking at anti-vaxxing behaviour, and actually how do we intervene and how do we unravel the damage that's kind of being done in that sector. And my internet's unstable, never mind. And essentially what you do when you look at behaviour is you look outside of that initial interaction point. So a traditional designer might have looked at the design of the experience of getting vaccinated, for example, whereas a behavioural designer will look to think, well, where does this behaviour start to form, and can we basically interject there and start changing the outcome? So where we basically determined to kind of pivot was the relationship between doctor and patient. And what you find, particularly at the moment, is there's a generational divide between doctors, i.e. authority, and patients, i.e. people who are trying to like receive information, and they deal with that information really differently. So it's about basically like re-educating doctors on how to interact with patients, so that instead of giving them one option, for example, they give them multiple options and guide them through it. And then the other sectors we looked at was improving disability access in the workplace, and the other one was self-referral for high trauma crime, which was a really hard one, so working with the police force in that sector. And I think one of the things I love about my job is that you get to pry open these really difficult problems and try and just do a small point of improvement, because behavioural design is usually really small. You're just finding a couple of key moments and just having a big effect on the overall behaviour. Yeah. ask me more about it. We can have a chat, and I can tell you all the other things I work on.
Fab, thanks. Have we got any other questions? I think we've asked all ones that have come through so far. Lots of lovely comments coming through on the chat, Lauren, if you can see it.
Yeah, you guys. I want you to know age and time helps. Yeah, Heather, as we get older.
I think, unless anyone's got a question, I think that's all our questions today. Leanne, if I want to hand back to you.
Yeah, so if no one has any questions, we'll wrap up. But thank you so much for joining us, Lauren, today. And everyone, give Lauren a follow on social media. If you didn't catch her handles, I've been sharing them aplenty on the Creative Mornings Twitter page, and on Instagram as well. So just check it out there and give her a follow, and listen to the Arrest All Mimics podcast episode as well. But yeah, so we'll leave it there, but enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Have a lovely weekend, and I'll be announcing next month's speaker in the next like week or two, so keep an eye out for that. All right, bye everyone.